drop the ER and put an O. So haciendo. As she mentioned, that's how we would conjugate that one. Anyone want to give a try to advertir? The one directly next to it on the right, it's an IR verb. How you would conjugate that in that case?
For what?
For the word right next to it.
For yo?
Yes, for yo. Yes. Yeah, let's keep it a little simple here. So anyone want to try to conjugate advierto in the yo?
Advierto.
Oh. Yeah.
Advierto, adviertes.
I said it. You guys got me. But see, that's good though, because you guys can recognize that I conjugated the verb, okay? So that's good. That's good. But the point is, there's rules that we follow. There's verbs where we change the E into an IE, okay? And then you would just drop the ending and conjugate it, whether it's a yo, a tu, él, or ella, or nosotros, or vosotros. But the cool thing about Spanish is we have many stem changes, not just the E into an IE, we have the O into a UE. And as you can see here, here's an example. We have contar. So where there's an O, you put a UE. So instead of saying yo conto, it's yo cuento. Okay? And then for two, it'll be tú cuentas. Ella or él, it would be él o ella cuenta. And again, nosotros and vosotros, the only thing we do is drop the ending and put MOS at the end. Instead of changing the O into a UE, we keep it, and what we do is just conjugate it on the end, instead of conjugate it where the O is, if that makes sense. Okay, anyone want to give it a try with this one right here? Almorzar, we're in the yo.
Almuerzo.
Yep, good. I see I'm a very smart group here. What about with this ER verb, doler? In the yo.
Duelo.
Yep, duelo. Yep, because the O would become a UE, and then the L at the end, the ER would drop, and we would put O at the end. So yo duelo.
And we don't pronounce the V's at all.
We don't pronounce it?
We don't pronounce V's.
V?
Am I looking at the wrong word?
Yes, we're doing
Is that
to
the
her.
wrong word? That's
Yeah,
what-
to her, yeah.
I'm good. Yeah. I was very confused.
Sorry. I know we're going a bit fast, but I feel like we have a bit to cover, so I'm trying to go a little bit quickly there. Okay, so that's the O to the UE. Now, there's special rules. In the verb oler, it also adds an H to the front, except for nosotros and vosotros. So the O would become a UE, but then we add an extra letter, an H, in the front. Okay, so, but the exception is for nosotros and vosotros, if that makes sense. Again, nosotros and vosotros, you don't have to conjugate the front. Usually you just conjugate the last part. But in oler, you would change the O into a UE, just like the first rule that we had up here, but there's an extra step. Now you have to add an H to it. Okay, so it's novuelo, for example. For the vosotros, again, we don't add the H, we keep the O, and then we drop the ER and just put EIS at the end. Okay. All right, there's another one here, jugar. The U in the stem changes to UE, except in nosotros and vosotros. Everybody see where we're at? Okay. So it would be yo juego, but when it's vosotros, for nosotros, we would say nosotros jugamos. Instead of yo juego, it's jugamos. For the nosotros or the vosotros. Okay. We have, on page 3, another rule, where the E becomes an I. In the conjugation of the IR verbs with the E, the I stem changes as follows. For example, in pedir, it becomes pido. Pido. Instead of saying, yeah, we were to conjugate that one, but the point is, you drop this E and you put an I right there in place of the E when you conjugate that one. So pido, yo pido, tú pides, él o ella pide, nosotros pedimos. Again, for this one, all we do is change the end. We don't drop the E, because in nosotros, vosotros, we always keep the front, we just drop the ending. And then, and ellos, no, vosotros pedís, sorry. And then this one will be, ellos piden. And again, there's a list of vocab words that follow these rules here that you can see. Competir, conseguir, decir, medir, perseguir, reír. And again, following these rules, does anyone want to conjugate one of these words in the yo from the vocab? Yep, that's good. Yeah. Anyone else? Medir, okay.
Medio.
So you conjugate it in the yo. Got it?
This is hard.
Yeah.
So what is it?
She said medir. So how would we conjugate medir in the yo, for example? Following that rule where the E becomes an I, and then the ending, you would follow the original rules that we had for conjugating in the yo.
Mido.
Mido. Yeah. Mido. Yep, mido, because the E would become an I, and the IR would drop, and you put O for yo. Yo mido. Yep, good. We're going to have some practice, don't worry. And the book also, if anyone's reading the book or wants to read the book, I really recommend it. There's a lot of examples because, again, Spanish is very unique in the rules it has, but once you get the rules, there's patterns that you can follow. Except until you get to the irregular verbs, then it gets a little crazy. All right, let's continue. So, there's a vowel changes in verbs ending in UIR. The example would be, for example, concluir is one of those words. So in verbs that end in UIR, not preceded by a G, Y is inserted after the U, except in nosotros and vosotros, as always, if that makes sense. So, yo, for concluir, we would conjugate it, yo concluyo. So we drop the IR, and before we put the O, you have to put a Y. So, yo concluyo.
Is the difference because the preceded by a G has a different sound, the G, Guido sound versus a GUI?
Actually, I looked it up. There's certain words that have a G in front, and then it's just, those are one of those, like I said, regular verbs that are conjugated a little bit differently. I did look it up to see, but there's just certain words that when they have the G in front, it just changes. You wouldn't conjugate it this way. So
I know, I guess most of the words I've seen so far that have a G-U-I, it's pronounced G, as against this UI is UID.
yeah.
UID.
It might be because of pronunciation, like you said, like conseguir, yo consigo.
Consigo.
Yeah, so it's different conjugation in this rule, because in this rule, it's, you put the Y and the O, so consigo, it just wouldn't.
I'm trying
Yeah.
to figure out if it's because if I hear a word that sounds like UID, it's automatically a Y word.
Yeah.
Versus a,
Most,
you know.
yeah, most likely probably what it is, like you said, the pronunciation probably changed the reason why they made that rule to add Y, to make it sound a little bit better for the people who are speaking it. So anyone want to try to conjugate one of these other words here? Construir in the yo form. Cool. Yep, that's good. Anyone else? All right. How about incluir? Anyone want to conjugate? Hey, how are you? Good evening. Anyone want to conjugate this word, incluir, in the yo? Good. You guys are good. Yeah. You guys are good. You got it. You guys got it, man. I can't believe it. That's good. Okay. Let's So as you can see, ir, which means to go, ir, to go, you got voy. Doesn't even sound like it, right? You know, yo voy is ir in the yo. Oír, for example, yo oigo. Again, doesn't follow any rule. Ser, to be, is soy, yo soy. Yeah, so it's very strange, right? Like they don't follow any particular rule other than that's what people decided they were going to use. For example, tú vas, él va, nosotros vamos, ellos, ustedes vais, y, no, nosotros, vosotros, ustedes vais, y ellos van. Yeah, it doesn't really follow any rule. The only good part here is that nosotros and vosotros kind of do look the same like the others, versus on the other end, as you notice, vosotros and nosotros doesn't change the beginning, only the end. In this case, they do look very similar to the other.
Can we do a real quick review question on vosotros? When do you use vosotros instead of nosotros?
Nosotros is we. It's we. Vosotros, like you guys.
Nosotros is you guys mostly in Spain.
Yeah, mostly in Spain. But it's you guys.
Ustedes in Latin America.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, ustedes would be, like she mentioned, in Latin America. But honestly, I've never heard anyone say vosotros in this area, so I would say ustedes instead of vosotros. But as she mentioned, the formal would be vosotros in Spain, but here in Latin America or here in the U.S., ustedes is the most commonly used way to say you guys, y'all. Okay.
Only because that's your last week, so I figured it out.
Okay. So now we have another, like, you know, they throw you another curveball. So there's some verbs that are irregular only in the yo. Yeah, it's funny, right? So many verbs that end in CER or CIR, preceded by a vowel, basically, an EO or U, you add a Z only for the yo form. Because as you can see here, as you guys can see, I got it said, right? If we follow any particular rule, you would just drop the final part and put an O. But no, in this case, they're saying you're going to add a Z before you put the O. So instead of yo agradezco, it's yo agradezco. You add the Z there. So it's another curveball in the mix. And all the conjugation, and this only happens in the yo form. So these verbs are regular, except they're irregular in the yo only. That's when you add the Z. And someone mentioned earlier, how do you know? You will learn practicing. Because you will hear people say that word, and you're like, oh, okay, that's a word that you add that Z on, or that you add the O, or that you add the Y. Because I know some of these rules, it seems like they just kind of like made them up as they went, and they probably did, but people, you know, memorize them when they're small, and then the more you practice and you hear people speaking Spanish, you start picking it up. Okay, that makes sense. That word, you said you add an O, that one you add a Y or a Z. You conjugate it. Okay. Let's keep going. All right, a little bit more fun. So some ER verbs, they add a G before the present tense, ending. So caer, right, which means fall, you add a G at the end before the O. So caigo. Does that make sense? Because for example, in caer, typical conjugation, you would imagine you drop the ER and you add an O, but in this case, no, you add a G.
So it'd be
And
caigo, caer, caer,
caer, it means to fall, and yo caigo.
caigo, caes.
Tú caes.
Yes,
Yeah.
so
Only yo, you add the G.
yo.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, like I said, tú haces. But in yo, it's yo hago. So we're adding a G out of nowhere. It just magically appears in the yo. But in the two, it would be tú haces, or ellos hacen, nosotros hacemos. But again, in the yo, it's the random G out of nowhere. Yo hago.
Comes up with all this stuff.
As I was saying earlier, that's why you have people, like when they're small, instead of saying yo sé, they say yo salvo.
Yeah.
And people are like, okay, where'd you make that word up from? But because we have so many irregular verbs, they just assume, okay, because I conjugated this verb with the GO or with the O at the end, maybe that's how I should conjugate this one.
Put another way, children have common sense, and then it's beaten out of them.
Yeah, I mean, so we have other commonly used verbs in the irregular, only in the yo. For example, caber. This one is funny. You don't even use the word. You just make up another word. Yo quepo. Because some kids will say yo cabo. Yo cabo because it makes sense, but no, it's irregular because it's a whole new random word. I don't know where they brought it from, and it's yo quepo. Igual, also, dar is to give something, right? Yo doy. It's like, where did the O and Y come from, right?
So it would be quepo, cabes,
Yeah,
cabe,
yeah. Tú cabes, él cabe, ella cabe.
and then dar would be doy, das.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's why it doesn't make sense, right? That's why it's an
Of course
irregular.
not,
Yeah.
because it's not a child's thing.
Yeah, it's irregular. Like estar, you know? Estar, same thing. Estoy. Yo estoy. But when you talk to somebody else, you would say, tú estás. You know? It follows the typical conjugation. You would drop the AR and put AS at the end. So, okay, let's keep going. I think we got through a lot, so that's good. Okay, another trick here. Whenever you add a prefix to a word, this hacer, to undo something that you're going to do. So basically to undo, but if you look at the conjugation, the DES, it stays the same. You only conjugate the hacer. And that's one of those irregular verbs where instead of conjugating the way you would think, you say hago, so this hago. Yo this hago. Another one, componer, again, you would conjugate it as if though the word you're conjugating is poner, and just ignoring that com, because that com is pon, pongo. If that makes sense. Any prefix, basically you can ignore it, conjugate the root word, and then add again the prefix at the end. Okay. Let's see. Here we go, talking about saber and conocer. So both words mean to know. So sometimes it's confusing to understand which irregular verb you're going to use because they both mean to know. But in Spanish, the context matters. So saber, it means to know information and facts, and to know how. So when you say, for example, ellos saben los detalles, so they know the details del accidente, of the accident. But for conocer, it's to be familiar with a person, a place, or a location, or to meet someone. So you would say, yo conozco a Juan. I know Juan, John. Little translation. So you wouldn't say, yo salvo Juan. You would say, yo conozco a Juan. Yeah. So does that make sense? Because both salvo, saber, and conocer mean the same thing in the literal translation to English. But the only difference is the context, because saber is for information and facts and know-how. But conozco is a person, a place, a location, or to meet someone. Okay. All right. And there's some examples right there. You guys can review it when you have free time. Lola, for example, sabe que vivo en la Florida. Like, she knows that I live in Florida, for example. But conocemos, another one would be, no conocemos ese museo. So I don't know that museum. Or we're not familiar with that museum, would be another translation. Okay, let's keep going. Well, actually, that's the end of that. Good. I do have a video. It's a short one. I hope it'll help a little bit more with. Hopefully.
Hola amigos, welcome back to the Language Tutor. I have a great lesson for you today. You know, friends, we've been talking about AR verbs, ER verbs, IR verbs, and we've been bringing in those verbs. And by the way, you can look up any AR, ER, or IR verb now and use it in conversation by applying those endings. But you've heard me say it before, in every language you've got rule followers and you've got rule breakers. You got troublemakers. And so today we're gonna learn about a few troublemakers, okay? Some irregular forms that are very common in Spanish, and they just have some strange adjustments to them. It's no big deal though. You can practice them and it will just start sounding natural to you, and you got them down with no problem. All right, so get ready to write. I hope you have your cuaderno and your pluma, your lapis with you, so you can take a few notes. But here we go with some irregular present tense verbs, okay? So we're still in the present tense. We'll get to the past tense later and all kinds of other fun tenses. But right now, present tense. Okay, so first verb I want you to write down today is traer, traer, T-R-A-E-R. Now, this word means to carry or bring, okay? Now, I want to tell you about this verb because it's pretty normal except for the yo form. Now, in the next several verbs I'm going to give you, the troublemaker is the yo form. Anytime we have, you've heard me say you've heard me say before that if we have a troublemaker, it's going to be the yo form, okay? So this is the only weird form. We don't take off the ER and then put an O on it and say bravo. That really doesn't work. So what it is T-R-A-I-G-O. G-O, yes. Where did that come from? We don't know. It came from Latin. So the next several verbs are going to have those G in the yo form, okay? So traigo is how you say I bring. All right. Now the next one is hacer. Hacer means to do, it means to make. And again, it's not H-A-C-O. We change it, it's H-A-G-O. So I do or I make is hago. Hago. All right, the next one is poner. Poner. This is to put. Now you can also use this in a couple different ways, like to set the table. You put the table instead of set the table. Okay? Or put on clothes. You use the verb poner also. And this yo form is P-O-N-G-O. Pongo. Pongo. Now I'll stop and just remind you really quick. If you're saying right now, what about the other forms? Those are normal. So you've got pongo. If I were going to say the others, it'd be pones, pone, ponemos, just like you would a normal ER verb. Okay, so again, it's only that yo form that's being a troublemaker. Okay, now this verb is salir. Salir is to leave or go out. It could be go out with sometimes. And its yo form is, you might be guessing already, salgo. Salgo. It's got that G as well. Okay, one more with a G in the yo form, and that is suponer. Suponer, to suppose. And it is just like poner with an SU, so it's supongo. Supongo. Okay? That gives you a good start on some of those strange G forms. Remember, the rest are just like normal ER or IR endings, okay? Now let's get into a couple of other strange ones. I mentioned this before in a lesson, but this verb ver, I just want to remind you about the verb ver. It's got that yo form that you would think, it's V-E-R, so you think we would take off that ER and just put an O on it and it'd be vol. But once again, just a reminder, we're going to leave that E in the yo form. That's the only exception to that verb. So it's veil, okay? And then the rest are just like you would, ves, ve, vemos, ves, ven, just like normal ER verbs. And the next one is leer, leer. Just as a quick reminder, two E's, we treat them just like you would any other ER verb, only taking off the last ER, which leaves you with an E. And therefore, when you say I read is leo, and then you read is lees, so you end up with two E's again in those. Just a quick reminder about that. Now, let's talk about the verb saber. Saber means to know. I want to go ahead and tell you something about the verb saber. In Spanish, we have two ways to say to be, right? So you have to learn the difference between ser and estar. We also have two different ways to say to know. So I'm going to tell you, saber is to know, but it's to know facts or information about something, or how to do something. Okay? So if you're saying you know how to do something, you would use saber. Now, the other form is more in depth, and it's knowing people. But we'll get to that one later. So saber means to know facts, information, or how to do something. If I were going to say, I know how to cook, I say, I know to cook. Yo sé cocinar. I don't say I know how to. You just say, I know to cook, or I know to play guitar. That's how we say we know how to do something. But its yo form is not sabo, S-A-B-O. It's this, se, with S-E with an accent on the E. And that means I know fact, I know information, I know something that you just told me. And if you don't know something, you ever heard anybody say, no sé, no sé? That's they're saying, I don't know. I don't know the fact that you're asking about. Okay, let's move on. The next one is caer. Caer, that means to fall. The yo form is going to be a lot like caer. Okay, so it's going to be C-A-I-G-O. Caigo. Caigo. All right, so that's I fall. Okay, now we're going to move into some verbs that are irregular in the present tense because they actually change their form. Okay, and this is a little bit like stem changing verbs, but that's a lesson down the road. Right now, why don't you just focus on getting these irregulars down, and we'll get the rules behind it later. That'll probably be the best thing. Okay, so the first verb is decir, which means to say or to tell. Now, let's put the chart up because I want you to visualize this, okay? So you might want to draw the chart in your cuaderno right now, on your papel. And let's put the conjugations up. Now, the yo form of this is digo, D-I-G-O. So it also has a G in it. But here's what happens in the boot. You're going to notice in the boot with this that we're changing that E after the D, we're changing it to an I. Okay, so yes, we are changing that stem, that first part of it. And so we're going to have that DE is going to be a DI in the boot. Okay? Now, the other weird thing is that the yo form has a G on it. Okay, now we can kind of start to apply the normal endings. So remember the G, remember the letter change in the boot, and now we've got digo, dices, and dice, and down here in the bottom right we have dicen. Okay, but now nosotros and vosotros form, we have not changed the second letter. It's decimos, decís. Okay? So right now, just get those down, and I say, you say, they tell, we tell, get those down. All right, next verb.
You want me to stop it, or everyone was able to get it down? We're all good? Everybody got it? Okay.
Is going to be venir, to come. Okay, venir is a lot like tener that we learned in the past, okay, in the past lesson. Venir, to come, is going to have an irregular yo form as well, and we're also going to change some of the letters in the boot, okay? And we've got this, vengo, V-E-N-G-O. Now down here in the tu form, we have vienes. And then down here in the bottom left, the ella usted form is viene. And then the ellos, ellas, ustedes form is vienen. Okay, but now, conjugate the nosotros form and vosotros form regularly without changing those stem, without changing the first part of it, okay? So venir is a lot like tener, the verb to have. Okay. I'm going to give you a couple more types of verbs and a couple little rules to bring in. When certain verbs in Spanish end in certain letters, we have to make some significant changes. So first of all, let's start with verbs in Spanish that end with these endings, G-U-I-R, G-E-R, or G-I-R. Sometimes the infinitive unchanged verb ends with one of these endings. And we have to make some spelling changes when we use it in conversation or writing. Let's start with an example. Extinguir. Extinguir, to extinguish. Now, this ends in the G-U-I-R. So when we use it in its yo form, we're actually going to take out that U and the I, and we're just going to have the O. Extingo. Extingo. Okay? And other than that, we can pretty much conjugate it like we would any other verb, taking off the IR and then putting the ending on there. Okay? So, but that G is going to lose that U and the I. Okay. Now let's look at GER and GIR verbs. In the yo form for these, that is going to change, that G is going to change to a J. Okay, so let's look at this verb, escoger. Escoger, which means to choose or elect something, pick something. Escoger, it ends in a GER, so let's change that G to a J in the yo form. And we get this, escojo, E-S-C-O-J-O. You just got to remember the J in the yo form to change that to a J. Here's another one, dirigir. Dirigir. Okay? Direct is dirijo. You got D-I-R-I-J-O. Okay, so the G changes to a J. All right, friends. Now that gives you some really good grammar rules today. Just try to think of some verbs. Maybe you even want to Google some verbs in Spanish that end with those letters and try to bring them into conversation because it'll start them.
Well, I think he did a better job than I did, right? But all the rules that he touched on are here in the notes that I handed out to everyone. So if there's anything you missed, I can share the link with you guys. If not, you can go to class work from Google if you're all signed up. The video is posted online. You can review it again with him. I know he might have gone this fast, you know.
Can you just tell us his YouTube ID or?
Yeah. I think he's
Natural to you. Okay? Practice all you can, friends. We'll see you next time on The Language Tutor.
the language tutor.
The language tutor.
Yeah, on YouTube. Yeah, the language tutor. So he has some videos, and if there's any chapters that you're reviewing and there's something that you don't understand, he breaks it down pretty well. He did a good job. He touched on basically everything, and I think he added a little bit more than what I explained. But as he mentioned, most of the rules, exceptions are in the yo form. That's why we wanted to focus on that. To continue, I also handed out a worksheet where you guys can practice with some irregular verbs that have those rules. Again, have your notes here. You can look at the notes and use this as guidance, but don't turn it to the back until you complete it. Then you can turn it and check your work. I only put it there so you guys can check your work, not to. Yeah, I highlighted it because I wanted to make sure I touched on the important points during the lecture. Okay. The problem is this though, vosotros, right, for example, or even nosotros, you're not gonna hear a lot here, honestly.
Well, that's the thing.
Well, vosotros, I'm sorry, you will not hear. Nosotros, you will hear.
Yeah, but the most of it, I've never heard it, ever.
Because it's more in Spain. We would say it was
So, is it always one of, not more than
I think what he said is the most correct way to explain it. You need to keep practicing it. It will stick. Because you'll start to like, okay, this is how it is. Like he said, be regular, you just gotta apply the rule.
Today, we're doing the verbs that I like, the ones that don't follow the rules. They throw in extra letters. Those are the weird ones. The tricky. I did better.
That does not make sense.
esa casi en un poquito.
Estoy confuso. Cada tiene O, R, A, I, O, I, Y, no, o solo I. chistoso. Este es guapo. Sí.
Even though the rent is high, or say something like
Yeah, of course, Nancy. He flew over fences like. Caballo, tiene un caballo. Esta caballo se llama Sin Cuidado. Yo veo esta más te necesite.